going to turn it over to Karen immediately without any introduction, because she's going to introduce herself to you and tell you how she came to be sitting here today. So good morning and welcome to our group, Karen.
Good morning, everybody. It's really a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much, Ina, for having me. Like Ina said, we've known each other for, I think, 25, 30 years, maybe. So I used to host my staff team meetings at Ina's restaurant, and it was one of our favorite places to go. So let me just start. I can introduce myself. And Ina, I did find that photo.
Oh, I would love if you'd share that.
Okay, let me see if I'm able to screen share this. It says host disabled participant screen sharing. I could send it to you if you're the host.
Send it to Ken.
Okay, here, I'll forward it to you because I just
okay, good. I don't want to take up too much of your time, but I love it so much. It's one of my favorite pictures.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you. So today I wanted to just talk a little bit about advocacy. I want to tell you a little bit about my personal story and talk about kind of the different types of advocacy that we use within my organization and advocacy that I have done as a person with a disability. So just to introduce myself, I'm Karen Tamely. I'm the CEO of Access Living, which is what's called a Center for Independent Living in Chicago, Illinois, here in the US. I know that we have an audience here all around the world, so that's really exciting. So some of the examples I obviously might give are from the US, but I think that they are very applicable to global disability communities. So let me just start out, and Ina, I'm gonna see if, you know what, if I can't get that photo to you now, I will get it to you.
Of course, no rush. Yeah, and I can share it afterward.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So yeah, so let me just start by kind of introducing myself and some of the work that I'm doing. But I was born with my disability. I've used a wheelchair all of my life. I have a disability called sacral agenesis. It's congenital disability from birth. I haven't been able to walk since birth. But I'm a person I'm married. I am a homeowner. I'm a mom to an 18-year-old who my husband and I adopted at 5 months old, and she has a disability as well. I'm a dog mom and I'm a CEO. And I was born in the late 1960s, and the life that I'm living now certainly was not what was expected or the vision for my life when I was born. The doctors told my parents that I would never sit up. I would probably never leave home, and that my parents should be prepared for a life of me living at home. Mind you, I've lived in Chicago 25 years, but my home was in California, over 2,000 miles away. So none of what my parents were told by the doctors at the time have come true, thankfully. I had countless surgeries and therapies over the years. I spent the first year of my life in the hospital. And I think the goal at the time in the late 60s was really to kind of make me more normalized, make me able to stand or walk, which at the end of the day was really never possible. It was much easier for me to use a wheelchair as a mobility device. And unfortunately, I wasn't given the option to use a wheelchair until probably grammar school. And so that's really when I started using a wheelchair. I grew up in a time in the US, before there was really any disability rights. There were no expectations of people with disabilities. I had to be carried into most stores and restaurants because they weren't accessible. As a kid, I would carry flip-flops in my backpack because I knew that if I had to use a restroom, I'd have to hop out of my wheelchair and crawl on the floor just to get into a bathroom stall. And that's really how I grew up, was living in a world that was very inaccessible. I wasn't able to, cross a street because at the time there were no curb ramps for wheelchairs. I couldn't get on the bus in high school with my friends. None of the buses had lifts or ramps and were accessible to people with disabilities. And I was also bused to a segregated school up until the third grade, because I wasn't allowed to go to my neighborhood school due to my disability. And so this was really the world I lived in, grew up in. And, obviously it was a time that I felt probably grew up really living with kind of a sense of isolation, that feeling of you being kind of less than, separated from my peers, simply because the world was not an accessible place at the time. And obviously so much has changed since then, and I'm going to talk about that too. So really what changed my life and the trajectory of my career was advocacy, honestly. Advocates whose shoulders I stand on, so to speak, are the ones that paved the way for the life that I'm currently living. And it's advocacy organizations like the one I now work for as the CEO, that is working to change the life of hundreds and thousands of people with disabilities.
No, but am I in the middle of Zoom?
Who's not,
I got it. I took care of it.
okay, please, sorry,
Okay,
Karen.
no worries, no worries. So I think when I was thinking about this talk today, I was just thinking how, I wouldn't be where I am today. I wouldn't be a homeowner. I wouldn't be a mom, if advocates hadn't paved the way in so many areas. I wouldn't have a job. I wouldn't have been able to go to college, if it wasn't the disability rights advocates before me that really paved the way. And so I think it's really my lived experience as a person with a disability, the barriers that I experienced growing up, that really made me want to do what I do today, which is the CEO of a Center for Independent Living that serves people with disabilities in Chicago to live the lives of their choosing, to live self-directed lives, and to create a world where we don't have barriers for people with any type of a disability. So I run an organization, what's called a Center for Independent Living. In my state of Illinois, there's 22 centers like my organization, Access Living. There's over 400 in the United States. But I also know that Centers for Independent Living are also global. They're in other countries, and Centers for Independent Living are organizations, but they really emerged out of a movement, what's called the independent living movement. In the US, the independent living movement really started in the late 1960s, early 70s, really off of the heels of the civil rights movement. And the independent living movement started really by disabled people, people with all types of disabilities, from all backgrounds, that really came together and said, you know what, we want to control our own lives. We want to have a say in how we live our life. For so long, it was non-disabled people speaking for disabled people and directing their lives. For so long, disabled people have had, a long history of institutionalization and discrimination and segregation in really all aspects of life when you think about it, whether it's employment, recreation, healthcare, education, transportation, you name it. There's a long history of those services being separate from the general population. And so the independent living movement was really about a rejection of that, It was about inclusion. It's about ideas around disabled people taking control over their own lives, making their own decisions, whether or not they can do tasks for themselves or not. It's really about having control and direction over your own life, and getting the support that you need. I don't know if any of you knew Judy Heumann or heard of her, global disability rights leader who unfortunately passed away last year, but she always said something that very much resonated with me, which was, you know, independent living is not about what you can and can't do for yourself. It's about how much control you have over your own life. So do you direct your personal assistants? Are you able to make your own decisions about when you get up, what you eat, what you wear, where you go, what you do? That's really the crux of what independent living is. It's not rooted necessarily in a functional definition. Independent living is also about peer support. And so peer support is really important. You know, this group here seems like a peer support group to me, but peer support is really a foundational tenet of the disability movement, because it is about people with disabilities being the experts in their own lives, right? Again, I talked about that rejection of kind of the medical you know, overlays of disability, and how disabled people came and really said, you know, we want to counsel and support other people with disabilities because we have this shared lived experience. And then, you know, independent living is really about moving away from the medical model. When we talk about disability and the history, there are many different models of disability, starting with the charity model, you know, the pity, raising money for charity to help people with disabilities, from the medical model or the rehabilitation model, which is seen more about disabled people being cured or fixed or more quote unquote normal, to the social model of disability, which is the framework in which disability rights advocates operate, which is about, it's not our bodies that need to be fixed or changed, it's the world, right? We need the world to be more accessible. We need housing to be more accessible. We need jobs. We need access to healthcare, access to accessible transportation. And when that does not exist, that's what truly is disabling. It's not our physical bodies and the fact that we might use mobility devices. It's the world around us that wasn't built for us. And so the disability movement is really about tackling those systemic barriers so that, you know, all of us can live in the homes, the communities that we choose. So Access Living as an organization, we do a lot of direct services that are based on these principles, the principles of consumer control. So the disabled person directs and says what they want, and we help them achieve that. You know, the idea of peer support. So a majority of our staff are people with all types of disabilities, and 60% of our governing board has some form of a disability as well. So we're really grounded in the disability run and led idea. And so we work on a lot of different issues, helping people find affordable, accessible housing. We fight for accessible transportation. We move people out of nursing homes into the community, get their households set up, get everything that they need to live in the community. So we do a lot of these direct services. We do peer support. We work with young people with disabilities, and we really see the direct link between services and advocacy, because again, we take our cues from the people we serve. Through our direct services, we see where there are gaps, where there are policy changes that need to be made. And so it's the disabled people that we're serving that are then, you know, our advocates helping us change the systems out there, making the world more accessible, creating more opportunities, more programs, more support for folks with disabilities. So that's really our model. So obviously there has been a lot of change since I was born, and when I was growing up, that's when the independent living movement and the disability rights movement was really taking hold. And so while I lived in a world that was very inaccessible, very low expectations, little did I know that there was this growing movement that today is flourishing. And for me to be able to see how much progress has been made is simply remarkable. It really is. And again, I believe it's because of the advocacy work and those that were really willing to take a stand, not accept what was being handed to them, have a vision for a better life and a better world. And they took steps to really make that happen. And so I, again, feel that every good thing that's happened in my life as a person with a disability has been made possible because others, advocates have paved the way for me with their vision of how disabled people should be living their lives of their choosing. So when it comes to advocacy, I think of it in kind of a lot of different ways in different forms. I don't think of it as, one set definition. So for us as an organization, advocacy comes in many forms. There's systems advocacy, right, where you work to change entire systems that impact countless people with disabilities. So this could be in the form of legislation, a rule change, a policy change, an executive order, a global treaty, like the United Nations Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities. That's an example of like broad systems advocacy that is, starting to change the world. So there's that systems advocacy, but there's also individual advocacy, and that's also what we work on. It's really fighting for something that's directly impacting you or your family. And it may not be impacting others. For example, a landlord has denied you the right to put a grab bar in your bathroom that you need to function. And, they said, no, we're not going to have that grab bar in there. Well, you're taking on the landlord based on your own individual need, trying to get that grab bar, thinking about the tools that are available to you to be able to get that grab bar. But that's something that impacts you specifically, not necessarily a wide range of people or a whole system. But it is about you exercising your own rights. And then we think about intersectional advocacy, and it's really taking on issues that may not impact us directly or personally, but may impact a segment of our population or other populations. And that can be impactful too, because I believe that there's power in numbers. And it's really about looking out for each other and supporting each other's goals and each other's advocacy agendas. So when we kind of drill down a little bit farther, advocacy can also mean many things. It could be education, just as simple as that, educating the community on a particular topic. Education, I think, is really critical in shaping public opinion that can then lead to other changes. So education can be sharing data, using personal stories with your lived experience, testifying in front of government bodies, or even using the media to get the word out and educate the public. Advocacy can be legislative, like I talked about, drafting and passing bills that would affect large numbers of people. It can also be legal, so exercising your civil rights. And, I'm grateful because now we have a lot of civil rights, at least in the US we do. Protections for people with disabilities that did not exist when I was growing up. So we have the Americans with Disabilities Act that covers transportation, government services, public accommodations that are not government funded. We have housing protections around accessible housing. We have protections in air travel. We have protections in education, all of which have come in the last, 30, 40, 50 years. And so using those legal avenues can be a really powerful form of advocacy because it might not just impact you. It can take individual advocacy and transform it into systems advocacy. And then I think media is also really important because it shows the public how a particular issue impacts people with disabilities, putting pressure on entities that need to change. So we use media a lot. I know you might have seen the front page of the Tribune the other day about the snow and the impact it has on people with disabilities. And you were just talking about how you haven't gotten out of your house. We're doing an advocacy campaign to try to get our city to plow sidewalks. We plow streets, we plow bike lanes, but we don't really plow sidewalks. And so the Tribune did a really great kind of story highlighting how snow and extreme weather impacts people with all types of disabilities. So that's a form of advocacy that really can help push the legislation that we're working on, but get the public to realize, yes, this is an issue. So as a disabled person, you know, it's because of advocacy that I am now able to ride the bus in any city pretty much that I go to, whether it's in the US or outside of the US. I can cross a street because now there's curb ramps. You know, my daughter who has a disability doesn't have to be bused to a segregated school. That would be absolutely unthinkable now. But all that happened because of the Americans with Disabilities Act, because of the laws that advocates were able to pass. Some examples of how I've used personal advocacy in my life. And one thing I want to say is that there are many moments, and I think you all probably would understand, where you don't want to be an advocate, but you have to be. And you come into these situations where, you know, you just want to live your everyday life, but you encounter a barrier that puts you in a position where you're forced to be an advocate. So I have two examples of that. One is I was grocery shopping when I was first moved to my neighborhood in Chicago, and they had those gates that prevent shopping carts from getting out of the grocery store, which means a wheelchair cannot get into the grocery store without calling out, "Hey, can someone come unlock the gate to let me in?" All I wanted to do was buy groceries. There were two of these stores in my neighborhood, and they both had these gates. And I wanted to do something about it. So I tried to contact the store. I talked about how this was really making my world inaccessible. And I didn't get a response. I didn't get any action. I didn't get any movement. Tried that, had to go to the next step. I talked to my community members who were in the same situation, other wheelchair users who lived in the neighborhood. We came together. We tried to get the store to do what was needed. Still nothing, no action, no movement. Finally, I took to the media, and we went out and we did like a little bit of a rally in front of the grocery store to bring attention to the fact that I couldn't get into the grocery store, or anyone with a disability couldn't get into this grocery store. That did the trick. It was the widespread public opinion, media, that really helped get this grocery store accessible. So I went in just wanting to be a regular customer, but at the end of the day, it turned into something good that benefited not just me, but a lot of different people, a lot of people with disabilities. Another example was I was going to support a political candidate, my husband and I, and we just wanted to go in as regular you know, members of the public and hear what the candidate had to say and think about volunteering for this campaign, and got there, and it was at a church with a flight of stairs, and we asked where the elevator was, and they said, "Oh, what elevator? There's no elevator here." That resulted in us sending a letter to the candidate, finally getting a meeting with the candidate about their inaccessible campaign. That turned into us being invited into helping to make their campaign more accessible, and them developing disability policies, you know, that they hadn't had as part of their campaign platform. And so that was an example where I just wanted to be like a regular person that was going to get politically active in my community. But it turned into an advocacy, you know, initiative that resulted in high impact, but, you know, I didn't go in wanting to necessarily be in this position. So those are kind of just two examples, just outside of my day-to-day position working for a disability organization, of how I've used various advocacy tools to make the world more accessible. And I think, as you know, the disability community, we do have a lot going for us. I always talk about how disability is universal. It's universal because it's the one community anyone can join at any time. You know, the work that we're doing to make our world more livable isn't just about those of us with disabilities now, but the fact that almost all of us will at some point have a disability. You can join our community through illness or age, injury, or birth like me. And, you know, disability really is a natural part of the human condition. And, you know, I am seeing really an outgrowth of disabled people really having more power and more presence. I'm thinking about all of the products that were developed because they were developed for people with disabilities that are universally used by the general population. So think about curb ramps at the end of sidewalks. Curb ramps were designed and, you know, legally required as an accessibility feature for people with mobility disabilities. But think about everybody that uses a curb ramp. It's, you know, parents with strollers, it's people with suitcases, it's people carrying heavy goods. Think about captions on TV. We go into bars and restaurants that are noisy, and, you know, I appreciate those captions to see what's going on the television screen, or if I'm watching a movie where, you know, it's hard to hear or people have a thick accent, I put the captions on. Those were for folks that were deaf. Voice command that we have on our phones really was an accessibility feature, but it's a hands-free feature that we all want to use. And I just learned yesterday that many of you may use Microsoft, but the blur feature where you can blur your background was an accessibility. It started as an accessibility feature because there was an employee at Microsoft that was hard of hearing and lip read and found it very hard to read people's lips when there was like a visual distraction behind someone's face. And so that's how the blur effect was originally created. And so there's all these products and things that we all use that are universal that started as accessibility features. So that's really what I mean when I talk about disability being universal, and how I think that is really something that we have on our side as a community. And so while it's true that we really have a long way to go in a lot of areas around disability equality and accessibility and disability rights, I also feel like it's a really exciting time to be disabled. So I feel both ways. The world has changed drastically in my 57 years. Like I said, coming from a very segregated world, and now seeing my daughter who's 18 in the world that she's living in is just so significantly different than mine was. The technology that's available to people with disabilities and commercially available, things like adaptive equipment and hand cycles and adaptive vehicles, accessible vehicles, adaptive sports and recreations, and all the things that I never had as a kid when I was growing up. When I was little, my dad made me a hand cycle. He bought a big tricycle and had his friend weld a crank so I could use it, like, because it was not commercially available. Now I can buy a hand cycle online. And so to see these changes that we've made over the last decades has been really, really exciting. And that we're really now celebrating an explosion of disabled authors, journalists, fashion models, adaptive clothing lines by major designers that are not utilitarian and ugly as they were in the past. They're beautiful and stylish. And that's because disability and people with disabilities are really being elevated in the public eye and as a consumer market. And we're seeing greater authentic representation, I believe, of people with disabilities in television, in advertising, in film, in ways that we have never seen before. We still have a long ways to go in that area, but there are some really groundbreaking things that are happening, particularly in the area of entertainment, where disability representation is present. And then employers, I'm seeing, you know, more and more focus on disability inclusion practices as a form of diversity, the disability perspective and the disability movement becoming more vocal and more visible. and more young people really claiming their identities as people with disabilities, not being ashamed, not hiding their disabilities, being out there, being proud about it, and claiming their disability and telling their story. So to me, all these things are also advocacy, right? They are ways that we're changing perceptions, we're changing the world, we're making disability more accepted, and really part of the fabric of our life. And so it's not to say that we don't have a long way to go, but I did want to just say, like, talk about the changes that I've seen literally just in my own lifetime, from really that charity medical model to that social model, and now to disability pride. Disabled people really saying, hey, we're okay with who we are. This is a natural part of the human condition, and we are part of the fabric of the world. So, so what can we all do? And just, I want to kind of talk a little bit about ways that we can all be advocates and move the needle and keep moving forward, because it is important that we all think about ways that we can change our environments, the world, as people with disabilities. So I do think anyone can be an advocate. You don't have to work for an organization. You don't have to be a political scientist. You don't have to do this as a career. You know, I think it's just really identifying what you're passionate about changing and on what scale. Really figuring out what's needed to make that change. Is it a rule change? Is it a policy change? Is it just simply changing someone's mind or a decision? And then finding support. So whether that's like-minded people like you, others who are directly impacted, or an organization whose mission is to do that work. There's definitely power in numbers. And then fourth, just decide how you would tackle the issue. What angle will you take? Will it be trying to get a meeting? Will it be using the media? Will it be legislative? Will it be exercising your legal rights? There's multiple ways to do it. And sometimes, like I talked about, you have to change tactics because you're not getting anywhere by this one method. So maybe you have to do something different. And so advocacy can be hard. It can be defeating at times. It can lead to burnout. And I'm saying that as a person who has done this my entire life. But the success of winning and achieving and making a difference is really beautiful. It's satisfying and can not only change your life, but can change the world.
So Karen, you know, I'm so happy that you reminded us about all of the things that have happened and the changes that have been made. And I think that's essential because we are an older population and we haven't seen, and because a lot of us are the late effects of polio, we might have had a difficult childhood to begin with, and then some of us passed for normal for a little while, and now we are in a different place and time with us. And so when you look at everything, where are you now in, what are the most frustrating challenges for you? What is left to do that you really find almost intractable at this moment, that you have hopes for? But where is the pain point for you right now when you look at everything? Where is that?
Yeah, I think the biggest issues that we deal with, well, one is there's still a lot of poverty in the disability community. You know, a lot of the people we serve are on disability income. There's not a lot of opportunity for building savings accounts, partly because of benefits and partly because people are not working. So employment is a big issue. I think the other huge issue is housing, is being able to find housing that is affordable, accessible, can meet your needs. You know, in the US, we do have housing laws that require accessible housing in multifamily buildings that were built after 1991. But we see a lot of non-compliance. We see discrimination in housing. And so that's a big issue. And then I think the third issue is really the need for more home and community-based services. So that people don't have to move into, you know, a nursing home or leave their home that they've lived in for so many years because they can no longer do their activities of daily living. And so that's one of the things that we're really fighting for, is is having that option. We want people to decide where they end up living and getting the support that they need. So I think those are the three issues that are very challenging that we are working on. So, you know, I felt it was important to kind of talk about a little bit of the positive, because I think as an advocate, it is easy to get into a way of thinking that like everything is awful. And, you know, that is true. There is so much change that still needs to be made. I can't make this too rosy, but I also think balancing this with just seeing these other really positive changes has been really encouraging and heartening to me.
I think we all are conscious of that, you know, in our lives. And I appreciate hearing that from you. Is there anybody who would like to ask a question or have a comment? We're happy to.
There is one comment. Stefan, would you like to unmute yourself and repeat the comment you put in the chat?
Please.
Well, sorry. Good afternoon or good morning to all of you. I hope you can hear me anyway.
Yes, we can.
I posted a question. I'm always surprised, and I think it relates to majority of us, but my question is, why do we identify ourselves as disabled people? We are not disabled. We are more able than anybody else around us. The only problem is that we have some kind of disability, and that's a difference. So I'm not disabled. I have a disability, and I think all of us can say the same. So if other people call us disabled, well, that's their problem, but we should be proud enough to call ourselves people. I am a man, I am a guy with a disability. I am not capable to do this and this, but basically, I am not disabled. Thank you.
So Karen, do we discuss the semantics on that? Is that an issue?
I mean, I think, you know, everybody has the right to identify how they want, right? I do think that, you know, at least in the US, disability is a legally defined word. You know, it was people with disabilities that fought to get rights for other people with disabilities. You know, people do have different ways of how they want to view themselves. Some people don't want to identify, other people do. There's different, you know, schools of thought around language. You know, some people want to say, I'm a person with a disability. I'm a person first. I want you to see me as a person, not as a disabled person. There's other kind of camps that are, I want to be identified as that. I'm proud of who I am, and there's nothing I should be ashamed of, and I want that identity first. So I think the language is something that's really evolving. But for me, I am the CEO of a disability organization that is governed by, you know, the types of services that we need to provide, that, you know, works with people who have legal rights as defined by the ADA, and the word disability is defined. And so I just want to give space for the fact that people have different views on this. And that's okay. And I think it's okay how people want to identify themselves is your choice.
Yeah, I mean, Stefan, I would have not described myself as being disabled years ago, and now I do. And so I think that's changed also depending on what the late effects of polio have done. So I hear you loud and clear, and yeah, you are a guy and you are terrific. So thank you.
Sorry, maybe just one more comment. I think that even in legislation, at least in Europe, but also the United Nations Convention on Rights of People with Disabilities is trying to avoid using the terminology like disabled people, disabled persons, but talk about us or about them as people with disabilities.
Uh-huh. Understood.
This is something which was done outside of our world. So I think I like this approach. So I think we should identify with this as well. Thank you.
Okay. John, you
know
wanted to
we-
say something?
Yeah, I know we've got Florence first, then Crippen, then David Mitchell.
Okay.
So Florence, would you like to unmute yourself, please?
Yes, she just did. She's very good at that.
Good morning, good morning.
Morning.
I just wanted to say, listening to this young lady, it brings me back to when in the 50s, when we were first just beginning to think that we could be accepted, quote unquote. And I remember as we talk about language, first we were crippled, then everybody got upset at the word crippled. Then I became an invalid. Then I became disabled person. Then I became a person with a disability. Then I became differently abled. Then I became physically challenged. I mean, you can't keep up with all this. But I think what you said, that we're the elderly community, we are, at least I am.
We
And I
are.
live in an over 55 community. And within this complex, they have a system. However, the bottom step is too high for a person in their mid-80s or 90s. In order to sue, you need a person's name to start the lawsuit. Nobody is willing to step up to the plate. They'd rather sit at home than get out because they don't want to, I guess, upset the apple cart. And it's a problem. It's if the elderly, a very big problem. But I agree with her. Advocacy must start, first of all, with the individual.
Mhm,
I have to advocate for me.
mhm.
I remember when I used to say disabled person or a person with a disability or whatever you want to call me, couldn't get off the sidewalk to cross the street.
Mhm.
All I could do was go around the sidewalk till somebody came up with the brilliant idea of a curb cut.
Right.
You remember those days?
I do.
Yes.
I do
So,
too.
I
but it
do.
starts with us, Ina. It
Mhm.
starts with
It
us.
does. It does.
We have to see the problem and we have to address it.
I agree.
You
Thank
know,
you, Florence. Thank you, Florence. You always add something really wonderful to the conversation.
thank
John,
you.
who was next?
Crippen, can you unmute,
Crippen?
please?
Hi, good
Hi.
morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are in the world. Can I make 3 quick points if possible? The first one is around what you're saying around advocacy, and I totally agree with that. But linked to that slightly is I think we need to sort of also talk about people paying lip service to particularly disability access, because a lot of our organizations just see it as a tick box exercise. Done, done, done. I think any place designing their services, venues, whatever it is, they need to think about giving people with disabilities the same experience as everybody else. And I think that's really, really crucial. The second point you mentioned about poverty, and what I think exasperates the poverty point to me is the fact that how do I put it? Often people have to pay more to use a service that have a disability, which is totally unfair. So some hotels will say accessible rooms are £20 more, or whatever it might be. Or and the third aspect is around people with disabilities being able to do things like everybody else. So, for example, if I want to go to Scotland tomorrow, I can go on the website, book my train tickets, and go. somebody with a disability can't do that. They need to phone up somebody, make sure they have help from either side, or make sure the ramps are in place. There's no guarantee when they get there that the lifts will be there. So, and I think, you know, society has made some great strides in ensuring that equity.
Yeah.
But it's not got far enough. And the final point I would say is, you know, as you said about it's universal. It affects us all in some way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. John, next.
The next one is David Mitchell. David, would you unmute, please?
Yes, I have done. Hello, everybody. Although it says I'm a chair, I'm currently president, very proud, of the European Polio Union. You've already met Stefan, who's our brilliant secretary director, and also with us today is Patrick McGillian, who's our vice president, who lives in Dublin in the Republic of Ireland. Can we thank Karen for an excellent contribution, very lucid and interesting. The key phrase, independent living. Just have two quick questions because we have our board meeting starting in 11 minutes time. But do you find, Karen, that there's any bias or discrimination against you because you are a woman with a disability, a female with a disability? And secondly, an ancillary question, something that is close to my heart. Do you use public transport at all? And Florence has just instanced, you know, some of the problems of getting on and off vehicles. So once again, thank you very much for what you said. And I just wondered if you have any views on my questions.
Sure, thank you for that question. I'll take your second one first. Yes, I use public transit. I took it to where I'm at right now today. I take the train. It is 70% accessible where I live. We're fighting to make it 100% accessible. It's a very old rail system. So I do see a lot of issues with that, even if it is accessible. Elevators break down, and you know, you really have to plan your trip carefully, make sure that all of the elevators are working at your origin and your destination. So that's something. But I also drive a car. I have a van with a ramp, and I use hand controls, and I've been driving since I was 16. So I also take taxi cabs that are accessible. So I use all forms of transportation, and that's another example of how my personal life turns into advocacy, because I use the barriers that I experience as examples for policymakers about how to make transportation better. And so it's really important that I constantly am speaking up, or, you know, sending in issues to our transit authority, like, hey, the elevator was broken, or there was no signage that this elevator was broken, or, you know, I waited 45 minutes for an accessible cab, that type of thing. So yes, to the second question. And I think for me, related to discrimination, particularly as a woman with a disability, you know, it's not always like blatant or obvious, but I do think people perceive certain things, or they have certain ideas when they look at you and see you using a wheelchair, see you being a woman. You know, often I get comments on the street that people don't think I'm employed, or you know, they question things, or they're extremely surprised by the fact that, you know, I lead an organization, or I'm a mom, or I'm married. And so sometimes it's more about like getting to know people and changing their preconceived notions of who I am as a disabled woman. But it's sometimes discrimination is hard to kind of, you know, pinpoint, because it's not always like so blatant. It's more subtle, I guess I'll say. But I do see it here and there, not necessarily in my everyday life, but yes, I have experienced that.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
The next one, Ina, is Dick down in Florida.
All right, Dick.
Yeah, my question for Karen is how do we get polios to come out of the closet? One of the problems we have in advocating for polios is having enough polios around to raise their hand and say, here I am, we need help. You know,
Yeah.
I'm there are only two admitted polios in my Rotary district of 2,000 people. You know, I know there are more out there, but they just won't admit it. And so that's my question is, how do we get people to admit, you know, even though they're afraid the social image may be detrimental to their feelings, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's always, you know, a challenge. I think, you know, again, maybe that goes back to kind of the peer support that only other people with a like disability sometimes can be the ones to pull people out and talk about why that's important. You know, I think it's a challenge, and it's a challenge that we face too, in terms of people either not wanting to identify or not wanting, you know, to be part of, you know, advocacy, or thinking about that. But, you know, it's not for everybody, obviously, but I think it's really building community and having people with polio, with post-polio, that are the ones trying to draw each other out, I think is one of the most important things. And I'm like really, really excited to even see this group here. I mean, this is really exciting to me to see that you all are meeting on a regular basis and you're all around the world. And I think it's groups like this that are going to really be the ones to kind of bring people out. You know, and maybe it's not on an advocacy issue, maybe it's on something else, a shared interest in life, you know, and getting to know people and make those connections. But I don't have the secret recipe because everybody's different, but you know, I think just the fact that this group exists is really terrific.
Karen, one thing,
Yes.
I know you're pushed for time immediately after this. Please indicate when you need to go.
Okay.
The next one we have, Ina, is Anne. If you would like to unmute yourself, Anne, please.
Yes, thank you so much, Karen. You've really brightened my day. You're just an inspiration. Thank you so much. I just want to make two quick comments. I've been to two doctors recently. I live in New Jersey, and neither one of those doctors had ever met anyone who had polio. So that's just an overall comment about those of us who did have polio. There's probably no instruction in the medical colleges anymore. The second thing I just wanted to say quickly, I live near New York City, and Broadway will give a discount to those of us who come in a power chair or a wheelchair. So if anybody's in New York City wants to go to Broadway, get on the websites and indicate you need the access. And I can't promise, but I have gotten like half price tickets. So I just, you know, I just wanted to say that. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Anne. I appreciate that. And I would say in the medical field, that is another area where we have a lot of work to do, because there is a lot of discrimination, I believe, in the medical system in terms of serving people with disabilities. There was a Harvard study that came out in the last few years that showed that 80% of doctors feel that disabled people with disabilities have a lesser quality of life than those without. And 40% of doctors did not feel equipped to serve people with disabilities. And so those were shocking numbers to us, even working in the field. You know, I've had my own barriers to healthcare, you know, getting access to diagnostic medical equipment, testing. I was turned away for a glaucoma test because it wasn't accessible. Many of my friends who can't get onto exam tables because they don't lower just simply don't get screened. And so some of these things really feed into why those of us who have disabilities don't get adequate medical care that we deserve. And so that is certainly an issue that people are really actively working on in terms of changing perceptions and getting diagnostic equipment and exam tables usable for our community.
So true. Thank you so much for bringing that up. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
I know. Guess who's back? Florence.
Uh-oh. Florence, what you got to say, honey?
Okay, a couple of things. In response to Dick, how do we get us old polios, quote unquote, to say that we had polio? You got to go back to the 50s, Dick. If you remember when we first got, I don't know when you got it, but I got it in
40s.
53. I was 12,
Mm,
and there was no such thing as being disabled your life. You had to work, and you must, and you will. All of us from that generation, our parents taught us, you have to become as non-disabled as you can be. You don't want to be in a wheelchair. You don't even want to use a cane.
Yeah.
And I think that in order to get us to acknowledge that we
mhm.
had it, you got to go back to then. And you got to start approaching people from then, not from now. Because where you are today, where I am today, is different than where other people are. In my community, I'm the only one that says I had polio. And we got 7,000 apartments. I'm not in Century Village, Dick, in Pembroke Pines. And 7,000 apartments.
There's plenty of polios there.
I'm it. So that's number one. Number two, as far as healthcare goes, I've had to sue Cleveland Clinic because the room that they brought me into, number one, they had to take the chairs out. And number two, the doctor had to step over me. So I had to sue them for them to give me a bigger room. That's a bone of mine. I really just can't deal with all that.
Yeah.
I'm ready to sue.
There are two things when the documentary that was made about my closing of my restaurant had me in there with a lot of my polio history. And when it appeared, it was in 48 film festivals. And invariably during the book signing at the end, somebody would come over, more than one, and would whisper, I had polio when I was little, but my family never wanted to tell anybody, so nobody knows. And I say, are you having any late effects? And they go, oh yeah, but I just tell them it's old age, or my knee hurts, or my leg is getting weaker. And so even now, all these decades later, they don't want to even tell their best friends that they had polio as a child. And it's always shocking to me. I'm getting to introduce Dr. Wunsch, who you remember spoke to our group. She's coming for grand rounds at Northwestern Hospital. And they've asked me to introduce her. And I'm sure I'm going to say in that room, I bet there are a lot of doctors in here who have never seen a polio patient and who've never asked about that. If you come up with some disability issues that don't seem to have an explanation. So I'm going to try to educate as many as I can that day as well.
I know the next one up, and it's probably going to be Karen's last, I think, is
Okay.
Alex. Alex, would you like to unmute, please?
Where's Alex?
I am unmuted, yes.
Hi.
Good morning, everyone. I just want to counter what's been said already this morning. I'm in Dover, Delaware, USA, and the Bay Health Medical Center based here in Dover has done something with their residency program that other states have not been able to do because Delaware does not have a teaching hospital connected with any of the universities in the state. But so we've got young residents, medical residents, who have been brought into the community to serve the medical needs of the residents here. And my wife and I have changed to use one of these younger residents, and I've been very pleased that they do know something about post-polio syndrome. They've at least heard of it. I've had to do a little more education with the GP than I did with the physical therapist. I'm being evaluated. As a matter of fact, I came from an exercise session this morning. It's brand new to me, but the physical therapist with whom I'm working knew about post-polio syndrome. He was educated at West Virginia University. and it is part of their curriculum, though not as large a part as maybe the folks on this Zoom would like to say, would like to see. But it's beginning to change a little bit. The other thing that I would like to emphasize that from my experience, as I've begun to grow into what my restrictions are becoming and will continue to grow more as I travel this post-polio syndrome path. The more I refer to myself as a polio survivor, the more conversations I'm able to have with people who don't know what it is, or are able to say, yeah, my aunt had that. And we can have a conversation, and that's beneficial.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's true. The word survivor gets it's the hook.
And education and awareness is advocacy. And I think that's really important, particularly in the medical field too.
Yeah,
You know, there's so much education and awareness that needs to be done. So I hear you on that.
Yeah.
One thing I was gonna suggest, I don't know if I mentioned Judy Human in earlier, and you know, obviously she had polio and was a global disability advocate. I don't know if any of you have ever read her
Yes.
book, Being Human. So that's, you know, something that might be great if you haven't read it. She has such a great story. She also has a young readers version of that, so educating young people, and my daughter got to be one of the critics on that book when it was in development. And so so it's called Rolling Warrior, and it's for young people with to educate young people on, you know, Judy's life and polio and how to be an advocate. So I would suggest that as a reading if you haven't checked it out.
Thank you.
I know. Can I make one comment?
Always.
Karen, Karen, one of the problems that we have, we are a worldwide group, and terminologies change from country to country. I get into awful trouble after I've been speaking to French groups or French-speaking countries, and then I suddenly switch back to talking to in English or one of the others. And in a lot around the world, in other languages, there is no such word as disabled. It is all based off the word handicapped. So we've got to be careful. You know, if we got a French person speaking here, you got somebody from Martinique, say, coming up here, they'd be talking about les handicapés. You know, they're handicapped. We've got people in Haiti who we deal with as well. So we've got to be careful. Quick funny for you.
Yeah.
A little while ago, we were going on holiday. I'm in a wheelchair permanently. I don't like the word wheelchair bound, because in fact my wheelchair is my freedom. And I get, like you, I've got a minivan and I get around with that and everything else. We got to the airport, we were going through security. And at that stage, I was the commercial director of a multinational, very large multinational, offices all over the world. And the security people at the where you put your bag through for the scanner turned around to my wife, and she really bit his head off when he turned around and said, "You are so good taking him on holiday." My wife is also a very senior person in what you call in America Reuters. Over here we call Reuters, the big news agency and entertainment company, second biggest to Disney in the world. But there is still rooted in various countries discrimination, which just goes systemic and goes through. The other quick comment is, it's all very well having laws. They've got to be implemented.
We know that.
Now,
Absolutely. Yeah, no, thank you for that. I agree.
Yeah,
Right.
we know that.
Yeah.
So Miss Tamley, go back and do your job. Go back there and make the world a better place, because that's what you have done throughout your career, whether it was in government or in not-for-profits. But mostly you managed to make us all better people. Thank
Well,
you.
Thank you, Ina, and thank you everybody for having me. It was really a pleasure to be here, and I appreciated the conversation. Thank you. Good
Thank you.
luck.
Thank you. Thank you. And send me the picture so I can send it to everybody.
Oh, yes, I will. Thank you all.
Okay.
I will do that
Okay.
right now.
Okay.
Take care. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye-bye.